He's dead weight. Honestly, Dad's the reason none of us actually enjoy Thanksgiving anymore. I was standing at the bottom of the stairs when I heard my son say that. I had come down for a glass of water. I hadn't turned on any lights. They didn't know I was there. I stood in the dark, and I listened. My name is Walter Greer. I am 67 years old. I spent 31 years working for the same manufacturing company in Columbus, Ohio, starting on the floor and ending up in operations management. I raised 2 sons in a house my wife Eleanor and I bought in 1987 for $83,000. Eleanor passed 11 years ago, and after she did, I kept the house because it was the only place I still felt like myself. I grew tomatoes in the backyard every summer. I drove a truck that was older than my youngest son's marriage. I did not ask anyone for anything. That is important. I want you to understand that before I tell you the rest. My older son is named David. He is 41. He works in finance, drives a German car, and has a way of talking about money that makes you feel like you've done something wrong just by existing without a portfolio. His wife is named Renee, and Renee is the kind of woman who redecorates a room and then describes it to you in a way that sounds like a correction. They live 20 minutes from my house and I see them, on average, 5 or 6 times a year, mostly holidays, mostly because David wants something. My younger son is named Craig. He is 38. Craig is softer than David, less polished, more likely to call just to check in. I used to think Craig was different. I am getting ahead of myself. That Thanksgiving, they had come to my house on Wednesday evening to get a head start on the cooking, which meant Renee wanted to use my kitchen and tell me I was storing things wrong. I had gone upstairs around 9 to read. I fell asleep in the chair by the window the way I often do, the book open on my chest, the lamp still on. Sometime after 11, I woke up, dry-mouthed, and started downstairs. The kitchen light was off. The living room was dim but not dark. They'd left the television on low, one of those home renovation shows Renee likes. I could hear voices from the sunroom at the back of the house, the room Eleanor always called the quiet room because of the way the light came through in the mornings. I should have made noise. I should have cleared my throat on the stairs, or called out to let them know I was coming. I didn't. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. I was 67 years old and I was thirsty and I had just woken up from a nap in a chair and I was not thinking about anything except water. So I heard it, David's voice first. Low and certain, the way he talks when he has already decided something and is just waiting for the other person to agree. He's dead weight. Honestly, Dad's the reason none of us actually enjoy Thanksgiving anymore. Then Craig. Quieter. I mean, he's not that bad. Craig. Come on. A pause. I heard ice shift in a glass. He sits there and criticizes everything. The way I carved the turkey. The route I took to get here. Last year he told Renee her stuffing was dry. In front of everyone. That was a little much, Craig admitted. It's every year. It's every single year. And meanwhile, he's got this house. I heard David's voice lower further. The way it does when he's getting to the real point. I ran the numbers, Craig. If he sold this place, between the equity and what's in his accounts, we're talking close to $800,000. 800. And he's sitting on it. He gardens. He drives that embarrassing truck. He doesn't go anywhere or do anything. And meanwhile, that money he's not going to sell the house. He might, if we framed it right. If we talked about how much easier his life would be. A nice senior community. Everything taken care of. He wouldn't have to maintain anything. We make it sound like it's for him. There was a long silence. What would happen to the money? Craig asked. Split it. Equal thirds, me, you, and a fund for the grandkids. He gets an allowance from it. Enough to be comfortable. Another silence. I was not breathing. An allowance, Craig said finally. And his voice was not protest. His voice was considering. I turned around in the dark and I walked back upstairs. I did not get my glass of water. I sat on the edge of my bed in the dark, and I looked at the floor for a long time. I thought about Eleanor. I thought about the summer we bought this house, how she stood in the backyard and said the light was perfect. I thought about the mortgage payments we made for 22 years, about the winter the furnace went out and we slept in the living room with the oven on, About the morning she died in the hospital bed they brought into our bedroom, how she asked me to open the curtains so she could see the garden. I thought about my sons. I thought about David's baseball games, about Craig's first day of kindergarten when he cried at the door and I held his hand until he stopped. I thought about every Thanksgiving turkey I had carved at that table badly, apparently, and every Christmas morning and every summer vacation and every single moment I thought I understood who they were. I was not angry yet. I want to be clear about that. Anger came later. That night, sitting on the edge of my bed, I was something quieter than angry. I was finished. I didn't say anything the next morning. I came downstairs at 7, made coffee, went out to check on the garden. Renee was already in the kitchen reorganizing my spice cabinet. I said good morning. She said the cabinet system I was using made no sense. I said I'd think about it. David came down at 8:30 and poured himself coffee and told me the market had been volatile. I said that was too bad. He waited for me to ask him more about it. I didn't. Craig arrived with his wife Linda and their daughter Sophie around noon. Sophie is 14, and she is the kind of 14-year-old that makes you believe the world might be all right. She hugged me at the door and asked if we could walk around the garden before dinner. I said of course. We walked the rows of dead tomato stalks I hadn't pulled yet, and Sophie asked me about each one, what kind they were, when I'd planted them, whether I was going to plant them again in spring. She has her mother's eyes and her grandmother's habit of really listening to the answer. I found myself talking more than I had in weeks. Grandpa, she said, stopping near the old apple tree. Do you like having us here for Thanksgiving? I looked at her. What made you ask that? She shrugged. You always seem kind of tired afterward. I was quiet for a moment. I like having you here, I told her. That was completely true. Dinner was fine in the way that those dinners are fine food on the table, conversation moving from topic to topic without landing anywhere real. David made a comment about the house needing new gutters. I said I'd look into it. Renee said the mashed potatoes needed more salt. Linda said they were perfect. Sophie ate 2 plates and asked me to tell the story of how I met Eleanor, which I had told probably 40 times, and she listened the way she always does, like it was the first time. After dinner, while the others were in the living room, I stayed at the table with my coffee and I thought, I had a lawyer. His name is Frank Paulson, and I had known him since the early 90s. He had handled Eleanor's estate. He was the kind of lawyer who answered the phone himself and told you the truth, even when the truth was inconvenient. I had not called Frank in 4 years, but I still had his number in the address book I kept in the kitchen drawer. I did not call him that weekend. I let Thanksgiving happen. I said goodbye to my sons and their families at the door the way I always did. David's handshake, Craig's half hug, Sophie's real one, and I watched them drive away, and I went inside and I sat in the quiet room in the dark. Then I started to think clearly. Over the next 2 weeks, I pulled things out that I hadn't looked at in years. The deed to the house, the account statements, Eleanor's life insurance policy, long settled, the investment account I'd been adding to since 1998, steadily and without telling anyone, because Eleanor always said to have something that was just yours. I spread it all on the kitchen table, and I looked at it the way David had apparently been looking at it as a number. 800,000 was actually low. Frank told me so when I called him the first week of December. Walk me through what you want to do, Frank said. I told him. He was quiet while I talked. When I finished, he said, This is entirely your right, Walter, but I want to make sure you've thought through. I've thought through it, I said. All right, Frank said. Give me 2 weeks. I didn't see David or Craig in December. David texted to say they were doing Christmas at Renee's parents' this year, as if that required an apology, as if I would be sitting by the window waiting for them. I texted back, Sounds good. Enjoy. Craig called on the 23rd to wish me a Merry Christmas. He asked how I was doing. I said I was doing well. I asked about Sophie. He said she'd made the honor roll. I said that didn't surprise me. I spent Christmas alone, which I had done several times since Eleanor died, and which was not as sad as it sounds. I made a roast chicken. I watched a film I'd been meaning to watch. I called my old friend Roy from the plant, who was spending Christmas with his daughter in Phoenix, and we talked for an hour about baseball and old colleagues and whether either of us would ever go back to Florida. Roy had been with me the day I met Eleanor. He was the only person I told about what I had heard in the sunroom. "What are you going to do?" Roy asked. "I've already done it," I said. Frank sent the documents to the house the first week of January. I read through everything twice. I called Frank with 2 questions. Then I signed where he had put the small yellow tabs, and I put everything in a large envelope, and I drove it to Frank's office myself because I did not want to trust it to the mail. On the drive home, I stopped at a diner I hadn't been to in years, a place on Route 40 where Eleanor and I used to get breakfast after church on Sunday mornings. I ordered eggs and toast and coffee, and I sat in the booth by the window, and I watched the traffic on the highway, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a while. Settled. That's the word. Like a level held against a wall, and the bubble finally sitting still in the center. In February, I called David and told him I'd like to have both families over for dinner. Not a holiday, just a Saturday. He seemed surprised. He said they could do the 3rd Saturday. I said that was fine. I spent the 2 weeks before that Saturday in the way I used to spend the 2 weeks before any important thing, quietly and methodically. I cooked. I cleaned the house. I called Roy and we talked through everything one more time. I slept well. I tended to the early beds in the garden. The ones Eleanor had started every February, even when there was still frost, because she said seeds needed a head start if they were going to have a fair chance. The Saturday arrived gray and cold, the kind of February day that can't decide what it wants to be. They came at noon. David and Renee, Craig and Linda, Sophie. Sophie came in first and hugged me and said the house smelled like pot roast, which it did. I told her she was correct. We sat down to lunch, and it was easier than Thanksgiving had been, which I had expected. No holiday weight to it. Just food and conversation. David told me the gutters had been on his mind. I said I'd taken care of them. He seemed surprised. Craig said he'd been thinking about maybe planting a vegetable garden this spring. Asked if I had any advice. I gave him some. Linda helped me clear the plates. After lunch, I asked everyone to stay at the table for a few minutes. I said I had something I wanted to share with them. David looked at Renee. Craig looked at Linda. Sophie looked at me. I had an envelope on the counter behind me. I did not open it yet. I told them that I had been doing some thinking in recent months. I said that when you get to my age, you start to take stock. You look at what you have built, and you think about what you want to do with it. David leaned forward slightly. I said that I had decided to make some changes to how my estate was structured. I said I had spent a lot of time on it, and I was confident in the decisions I had made. I said Frank Paulson had helped me, and everything was properly documented. I opened the envelope. I slid 2 pages across the table. David picked his up first. His face changed while he read. The way a face changes when what it expected to find is not what it finds. The house was no longer solely in my name. I had transferred a 50% stake not to my sons, but to a community land trust that worked with low-income families in Columbus. On my death, the remaining 50% would follow. The house could not be sold by anyone other than the trust for as long as the trust existed. I could live in it for the rest of my life. After that, it would be used for families who needed it. My investment accounts had been restructured. The largest one, Eleanor's money, built over decades, had been directed into a foundation. A small foundation, Frank's words, but properly constituted. The foundation would fund reading programs in Columbus public schools, specifically at the elementary school Eleanor had taught at for 19 years. A board of 3 would oversee it. Roy was one. Frank was another. The third was a woman named Agnes, who had been Eleanor's closest friend and who still volunteered at the library twice a week. There was a college fund. It was in Sophie's name. David put the paper down. He looked at me with an expression I had not seen on him before. Not anger exactly. Something more like the recognition that a door he had been walking toward for years was not a door at all, but a wall. "Dad," he said. "This is he stopped. It's done," I said. Not unkindly, just clearly. Craig was still reading. Linda had her hand on his arm. Sophie was looking at me. I nodded at her slightly, the way I used to nod to her when she was small and nervous about something. She had never needed much. That girl. Just a signal that things were going to be all right. David tried again. He said he thought we should have discussed this as a family. He said he was concerned I had made decisions I might regret. He said he wanted to make sure I had been thinking clearly. I told him I had been thinking more clearly in the past 2 months than I had in years. He said he wasn't sure Frank had given me the best advice. I said Frank had given me the same thing he had given me for 30 years, which was honest counsel, and that I trusted him. Renee said nothing. She had put the paper down, and she was looking at the table. Craig put his paper down. He looked like he might say something. Then he looked at Sophie, who was looking at me, and he closed his mouth. The room was quiet for a moment. Outside, the gray February light was coming through the kitchen windows, the way it always has. The same light that came through when Eleanor was alive. The same light that will come through after I am gone, into whatever family ends up sitting in these rooms. I stood up and got the coffee pot because the coffee was ready, and I thought everyone could use some. I poured Sophie's cup first. She wrapped her hands around it and looked up at me. "Can we walk in the garden later?" I said yes. David and Renee left before 3. There was a handshake at the door, and a comment about traffic that didn't need to be made. I said it was good to see them. I meant it, more or less. I meant the part about seeing them. I did not mean the good. Craig lingered. After Linda took Sophie outside to look at the garden beds, he stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at me for a while. I knew something was different. He said, finally. I didn't say anything. After Thanksgiving, he said, "You were different." "I heard you," I told him. In the sunroom. That night, Craig was quiet for a long time. He looked at the counter. He looked at the window. He looked at the floor. "Dad, he started. "You didn't stop him," I said. Not angry, just stating it. "No," he said. "I didn't. That's what I needed to know," I said. He left 20 minutes later. I stood at the door the same way I always stand at the door, and I watched them go, and I watched Sophie turn and wave from the back seat of the car. I raised my hand. She pressed her palm flat against the window for a second, the way she used to do when she was very small, and then the car turned at the end of the drive and was gone. I went inside. I washed the dishes. I went to the quiet room and sat in the chair Eleanor always sat in, the one with the good light on the east side. And I sat there for a while without reading or watching anything or listening to anything. The house was quiet. I have lived in quiet houses before. After Eleanor died, the quiet was wrong. It pressed against the walls. It collected in the corners. It was the kind of quiet that makes you call someone just to hear a voice. This was not that quiet. This was the quiet of a thing settled. A document signed. A scale balanced. I thought about the families who would eventually sit in these rooms. I thought about children who would run in this hallway and look out these windows and maybe, on the right morning, see the light come through the kitchen the way it always has, warm and plain and honest. I thought about Eleanor and her certainty that seeds needed a head start if they were going to have a fair chance. I thought about Sophie's face when she read her name on that paper, the way she looked up at me, the way she didn't say anything for a moment, just held it. She is Eleanor's granddaughter in ways that have nothing to do with genetics. She has that same capacity for stillness when something matters. Roy called that evening. "How did it go?" he asked. "The way I expected," I said. "David?" "Yes." "Craig?" I thought for a moment. "Worse," I said, because he knew better, and he was quiet anyway. Roy was silent for a moment. "And Sophie?" "Sophie is going to be all right," I said. "Of course she is," Roy said. "She's got your number. Always has." We talked for a while after that, about other things. Spring training, his daughter's new house, whether I was going to plant the heirloom tomatoes again or try something different. I said I was going to try a new variety Eleanor had always wanted, but we never got around to a large yellow one, mild and sweet, the kind that was better eaten standing over the sink than cut on a plate. After I hung up, I sat for a while longer in the quiet. I did not feel like a man who had taken something from his sons. I had not taken anything. I had simply stopped offering what was never really available in the first place. The thing they had been calculating. The number they had been patient about. the inheritance they had been quietly managing toward. What I had was mine. Eleanor and I had built it together, dollar by dollar, year by year, through the years when money was tight and the years when it was less tight, through the bad winters and the good summers. It was built out of work and time and the specific kind of love that shows up every day and doesn't make speeches about it. You don't inherit that. You earn it or you don't. I earned it. I know what kind of father I was. I was not perfect. I was not always patient. There were years when I worked too much and came home too tired to be the man my sons needed. There were arguments I handled badly and silences I let go on too long. I am not pretending otherwise, but I showed up. Every single year, I showed up. The mortgage was paid. The lights were on. There was food at the table, and a truck in the driveway that I drove them to school in, and a backyard where they played. When Eleanor got sick the first time, I worked nights for 8 months to cover the bills without telling them so they wouldn't worry. When David needed money to start his first investment account, I wrote the check without being asked. When Craig's first marriage fell apart, I drove 4 hours to be there. I showed up. I did not expect gratitude for all of it. That is not the point. You don't raise children so they will repay you. You raise children because they are yours, and you love them, and you want them to be all right in the world. I still love my sons. That has not changed. Love is not the same thing as approval. Love is not the same thing as reward. What I gave them was my time and my presence for nearly 40 years. The house is staying where it belongs. Sophie starts college in 4 years. She wants to study environmental science. She told me once in the garden that she wanted to work on soil health, on the chemistry of the dirt itself, on what makes things grow. I told her Eleanor would have loved that. She asked me to tell her more about Eleanor. I told her everything I could remember, and then I told her again. In the spring, I am going to plant those yellow tomatoes Eleanor always wanted. I am going to tend them the way I tend everything steadily, without drama, without expecting anything more than what a thing is actually capable of giving. And when they come in, I am going to pick them on a warm morning and bring them inside and eat them standing over the kitchen sink. That is mine. That has always been mine. I did not need to say a word to take it back.